Well, you don't have Donald.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Broughton, and I am your moderator for the webinar, the Green Party of Missouri's webinar on degrowing the military while preserving jobs. And I am a Green Party of the United States delegate from Minnesota and an Eco Action co-chair. Drastically reducing the military budget may be the most important step that humanity can take toward peace. Yet vast numbers of people may be the most, sorry, depend on military production for jobs that provide for their families. This webinar will link the needs for economic degrowth and for stopping unending wars. How does war hurt soldiers who participate in it? How does it harm people of color, Native Americans, and the world's colonized communities? How could money wasted on war be redirected to social necessities? How can we ensure jobs for those employed in military production via a shortened work week, for instance, or retraining and job sharing? Our first speaker is Christian Sorensen. Christian researches the business of war. A U.S. Air Force veteran, he is the author of Understanding the War Industry. He is going to describe what the United States war industry produces, examine what portions should be shed during degrowth, and offer suggestions as to what portions could be repurposed. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Dr. Lynn, Katrina, Dawn, Haig, Janet, Tina, Sue, Rachel, and everyone who's involved tonight. This is a real treat on my end. So here we go. Thank you to you. An initial note. The U.S. war industry is fairly flexible. Corporations, large and small, are regularly establishing new facilities and closing old ones. It could do anything if taken out of the hands of investors and executives and placed in the hands of workers. Few definitions. Degrowth. For degrowth, I'm talking about reducing production and adjusting the economy in order to prepare for the emergency in which we live, the climate crisis, and avoid contributing more to the crisis. Capitalism. The workers are not in charge of a corporation. The executives and the boards of directors are in charge. Their job is to maximize profit for investors. The workers create the profit. They don't keep the profit. The profit goes to the investors. So what is the war industry? The war industry is the corporations that develop and sell goods and services to the US military, US intelligence agencies, and allied governments. The United States has by far the biggest and most lucrative war industry of any nation. You know the big names, the big corporations, Lockheed Martin, RTX, formerly known as Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Boeing, and L3Harris. Those are the big six. Jobs. The war industry is a lousy job creator. Spending on other fields such as education, healthcare, and sustainable energy create far more jobs than spending on war and the military. And the research for that is done by Heidi Garrett Peltier of Brown University, Watson Institute, Cost of War Project. The war industry produces fewer and fewer jobs over time. War corporations are like any other big business. The executives at the top automate as many of the workers' jobs as possible. The executives combine jobs. The executives fire workers regularly. Okay. Even the war industry's top pressure group, the NDIA, the National Defense Industrial Association, acknowledges this. 3.2 million jobs in 1985, down to 1.1 million in 2019. So what does the US war industry sell? What does it make? Aircraft, ships, submarines, land vehicles, information technology, communications equipment, satellites, rockets, espionage hardware and software, ordnance. Ordnance is stuff that goes boom, stuff that explodes, small arms and light weaponry, transportation, logistics, base operations, computing power, and parts and maintenance for everything, for all of the above. So let's apply degrowth. Let's apply degrowth. What parts could be shed during degrowth? Well, let's shed the bombs and the missiles, okay? Those don't help anybody. Shed small arms and light weaponry. Shed consulting, shed administration, all those contracts. Shedding parts of the war industry does not have to hurt the workers or involve getting rid of those jobs. We keep the workers. Consider the design and manufacture of nuclear weaponry. Workers working on this right now include everyone from physicists, mathematicians, engineers, all the way to welders, machinists, mechanics. These are brilliant, hardworking people. Many helpful, peaceful endeavors could benefit from these workers, including public transportation, infrastructure, scientific exploration, and on and on. Keep the knowledge as well. The knowledge, for example, to create bombs and missiles involves physics, mathematics, engineering. That's in general. And in specific, aerodynamics, metallurgy, propulsion. And all of this can be used on beneficial projects, high-speed rail, coastal fortification against rising seas, research and development into peaceful, non-polluting space exploration. What portions of the U.S. war industry could be repurposed during degrowth, excuse me? Well, current production in the war industry focuses on land vehicles. That is a quick switch into public transportation. Current production of construction and project management can go into infrastructure, fortifying our infrastructure and the infrastructure of other countries around the world. Base operations and support can also go to infrastructure. Space launch and satellites that are currently used to spy on and hurt other nations and other groups and other peoples around the world can be turned in no time into satellites for weather forecasting and climate study. The production already exists for all of this stuff. Production right now in the war industry of information technology and cyber warfare can go to global connectivity and rural broadband, which we are seriously lacking here in the United States. Espionage hardware and software can go towards international relations, communication, and coordination. Aircraft, right now, that goes to bombing and spying on other countries, can go towards disaster relief, airlift, humanitarian aid, resource allocation. And logistics products can go to disaster preparation and relief. These are just a few examples of the many. So with the wars ended, the overseas bases closed, the troops brought home and taken care of, what do we do with all the money that used to go into nonstop war? And we're talking around $1 trillion a year. What do you do with that now? Well, public need. The American public is hurting, absolutely hurting. You got two corporate parties that don't care about the public right now under the status quo. The public is hurting. So healthcare, infrastructure, climate resiliency, public transportation, education, reparations, debt relief, all of this can benefit from the $1 trillion U.S. warfare budget. Local resiliency is incredibly important. Consider what is to be spent on the next generation of land-based nuclear weapons. Around estimates, low estimates, over $250 billion. That instead could build over 52 million community gardens across the country. Imagine that. If you're not furious right now, imagine. And that money could have enough over to take care of all the food stamps for a year in the United States. The workers must be in charge. What happens when a corporation is in the hands of the workers and not the executives and the investors? Well, there's less pollution. The workers aren't going to deliberately poison their own community and the communities around them. There's better safety for the workers. There's improved product quality. They're not going to skimp on material inputs. No more price gouging. And they will start creating products that actually help people. The workers are in charge. So I know that was a lot of information. It went quickly, but I want to leave you with this. What will degrowing militarism require? Well, it's going to take a grassroots change in the economic system. Right now, corporate executives are in charge and Wall Street is in charge. They're making the decisions. When the workers are in charge, degrowth can be implemented. A word of caution, right now we are very divided as a country. Do not get divided, particularly along racial lines. The US ruling class is very well versed in dividing the American public. The 1% knows how to divide the 99%. Unite as a class. I write at Substack, thebusinessofwar.substack.com. I look forward to your questions and thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Christian. Our next speaker, I believe, is going to be showing us a video. Haig Hovanes from the Peace Action Committee. Take it away, Haig.
Okay, I'm waiting for the other share to end.
I ended my share.
Okay. All right, I'm not showing a video, showing slides, and very briefly, I'm going to explain that although this is a very difficult political problem, degrowing U.S. military, it is not a hard analytical problem at all. And I'm going to put up some rough figures that make that case. So why is this an issue? The chart shows that it is growing quite significantly. We're getting up to $1 trillion. It's notionally 800 billion, but if you add in all the nuclear agencies and the black budgets of the intelligence agencies, it's close to $1 trillion. And it's a problem because it's a huge diversion of resources from civil society. It's a major cause of environmental degradation. There are many polluted military sites, some of them radiation polluted and posing major dangers down the road. And it leads to bellicose foreign policy. All these military forces lead to adventurism overseas and spreading death and destruction. So, as I said, it's not a hard analysis. There are 5 obvious ways to make major reductions. The first one is to eliminate very costly but obsolete or redundant armaments. Carrier battle groups are hugely expensive. We maintain about a dozen. If we got into a war with China, it would take them about half an hour to destroy a carrier battle group. We have no effective defense against a saturation attack by hypersonic missiles. The missile magazines in the escorting ships cannot be reloaded at sea. Once they're empty, they're helpless. So all the war games indicate that we would lose badly in the Pacific. So there's really no point in having this obsolescent and extremely costly weapon system. The land-based ICBMs can be destroyed by precision targeting, and they're highly destabilizing because they have to be launched immediately on warning and they can't be called back. And right now we're planning to replace them all at enormous cost. And manned nuclear bombers also underway for replacement, very costly and no longer very effective because of the latest advances in radar technology that negates stealth. That gets you to about $150 billion a year in savings. There's no need for 800 plus foreign military bases. They're not necessary. They're provocative and they generate trouble for most of the people in the locations they're in. We can have treaty arrangements that would give us similar international advantages to use other nations' bases as necessary. And a lot of that money should go to foreign aid rather than just being trespassers in these countries. That would come to about 60 billion. If we were to cut the armed services by 30% in headcount, eliminating those huge naval forces and overseas bases could easily take us to that kind of reduction. That would save about 60 billion. Other speakers will describe in detail how these personnel could be redirected. And nationalizing defense programs, stop the abuse of contractors of the process, stop cost overruns, and auditing the military. So it comes to about 300 billion, and that could be saved in a straightforward way annually. And some of the things we could do with that money is end homelessness. We could free tuition for state universities, get universal daycare and Medicare to.
Can we mute those who are not?
So that's the end of my quick overview. I hope you'll see that the money is there and it could be used very effectively in civil society. Thank you.
Thank you, Haig. Our next speaker is Dr. Ho-Chih Lin. Dr. Lin is the lead researcher, Tipping Point North-South, Transform Defense Project, and will describe the enormity of war production. He is trained as a quantum physicist, holds an MSCI and a PhD from University College London, and an MSc from London School of Economics and Political Science. Welcome, Dr. Lin. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to give this talk. It might be nice for me to give a little bit of context to my talk, as my organization will be new to most, if not all, of the audience. Although I trained as a physicist, my work in the field began when I worked on a cinematic documentary, We Are Many, a film about the February 15th, 2003 global anti-Iraq war protest. While working on this movie, I met executive producer Deborah Burton of Tipping Point North-South, and that led me to join her work on thinking through ways to cutting global military spending. We developed the 5% formula proposal, effectively a formula to degrow military spending over 10 years and beyond, back to the post-Cold War era of global military spending of only $1 trillion a year. As we saw more of military spending and the economy, this led to our Green New Deal Plus proposal, Green New Deal that factors in the military economy, and our interest in placing the military in the degrowth narrative. Before I begin, let's remember the US military economy far outstrips other top military spenders by far, whether in terms of its size, employment share, military budgets, and number of military bases, etc. Therefore, the US military economy is not just a huge issue for itself, but also the rest of the world. This also means that if the USA can make the change, it will lead and influence everyone else, as it sets the terms of reference for the global military economy. So, wars in Ukraine and Gaza are fueling a new arms race. We are currently spending more than $2.4 trillion a year on the global military, at least a quarter of which goes to the arms industry. For top military spenders, such as United States and the United Kingdom, more than half of national military spending goes to private military contractors, such as Lockheed Martin and BAE Systems. The annual global military spend has increased by around 30% since 2014 and continues to increase. The war in Ukraine has also led to NATO calling for its members to increase military budget further to 2% or more of GDP. Had this been in place between 2021 and 2028, it would have resulted in an estimated total military expenditure of 11.8 trillion and a collective military carbon footprint of 2 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent, totally incompatible with climate targets and net zero by 2050. But some, including the arms industry and its lifeblood, the oil industry, are more than happy with this status quo, making obscene profits while polluting and destroying the only habitat we have. The top 100 arms companies in the world made 592 billion in arms sales in 2021, the year before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The top 20 alone accounts for 2/3 of the total and come from just a handful of countries: US, China, Russia, UK, France, and Italy, and their profits have been soaring. In terms of military carbon footprint, military spending positively correlates to military greenhouse gas emissions. So the more you spend on big-ticket fossil fuel-intensive weaponry, the more emissions you emit, whether in production or in use. Arms manufacturing is a carbon-intensive part of the economy, and its input, such as primary metals, rubber, or chemicals, are also very carbon-intensive. A recent study found that a percentage point rise in the military spending share of GDP leads to up to 2% rise in total national greenhouse gas emissions. It is therefore imperative for us to overturn the economics of war and degrow the military economy. Degrowth is a planned and democratic reduction of production and consumption in rich countries to lower environmental pressure and inequality while improving people's well-being. So if all areas of human activity must decarbonize and be considered for degrowth, why are we letting the oil-dependent militaries follow a different path? The IPCC Mitigation of Climate Change report offers up ways to degrow the economy. We apply their model to the military economy. For example, first, avoid locking into expensive and gas-guzzling weapon systems. Second, substitute the arms industry with the green economy. Many skills in the high-tech arms industry are interchangeable with those required by the clean energy industry. Third, improve by electrifying the existing defensive weapons while gradually getting rid of offensive weapons, including nuclear weapons. Military spending increases can lead to a crowd out in green investment, and the military spending is the least effective public spending to create jobs. Unlike other economy sectors, the military economy completely relies on military spending. So the most effective way to degrow the military economy is to cut and divert military spending to deliver a Green New Deal, a shift of limited resources to fund urgently needed human needs, such as universal health care and the wholesale electrification of the society with 100% renewable energy. Equally, we also need to find globally new money for climate finance to support the many climate vulnerable nations at the sharp end of climate chaos, who have done nothing to cause it and do not have the resources to adapt or mitigate. Just to give one example to put priorities in perspective, the F-35 fighter jet program will cost taxpayers more than $2 trillion over its lifetime. The money spent on that jet could fund any one of these: international climate finance at $100 billion a year for 20 years, or global biodiversity conservation for the next 20 years, or WHO funding for the next 1,000 years. So rich nations are telling climate vulnerable nations they have no money. Yet if the current trend continues between 2024 and 2030, we can expect to see more than $17 trillion spent on the global military. Rich countries spend 30 times as much on their militaries as international climate finance for climate vulnerable countries. Historically, military spending has been central to reinforcing power, poverty, and unjust distribution of resources, and this is inextricably linked to the long-standing destructive role of those same nations' corporate interests across the global south, notably through the extraction of resources. The old seven colonial powers alone, US, France, Russia, Germany, Italy, UK, and Spain account for 80% of global arms export, mainly to the global south. The excessive military spending of many countries in the global south is the manifestation of this exploitation. To conclude, to degrow the military economy is to create the double dividend for our global society. If the fossil fueled way of national defense is both ecologically damaging and psychologically flawed, then the possibility remains that we could live better and safer by spending less on militarism and reduce our impact on the environment at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. Our next speaker is Katerina Canyon. Katerina is the executive director of the Peace Economy Project, focusing on transitioning economies from military production to sustainable development. She will discuss how companies like Boeing can pivot from war production to community development, exploring how degrowth in military spending can drive economic and social benefits. Welcome, Katerina.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, everyone, for being here and for supporting degrowing the military. As Rachel said, my name is Katerina Canyon, and I'm here with Peace Economy as the Executive Director of Peace Economy Project. Our organization advocates for redirecting resources from military and defense production towards sustainable community development. And as Rachel said, today I'll be discussing how companies like Boeing can pivot from war production to community-driven development and how transitioning from military spending to sustainable projects can foster both economic growth and well-being. The current landscape of military production and jobs, and here an overview of the status quo. Companies like Boeing play a major role in defense contracting, producing military aircraft, weaponry, and surveillance technology. The focus on war production generates significant employment, especially in states like Missouri, where military contracting is deeply integrated into the local economy. However, this emphasis has locked regions into a cycle where economic prosperity depends heavily on military expenditures. Shifting our perspective, however, offers an opportunity to break free from this cycle and pursue a sustainable, socially beneficial growth. The concept of degrowth and military spending, defining degrowth and its benefits. Degrowth involves intentionally reducing investments in certain sectors like military production to reallocate those resources toward industries that foster sustainable development, community health, and resilience. When we talk about reducing military spending, we're not just talking about less production. We're envisioning a redirection of resources to build a peace-centered economy. The economic and social benefits, job creation and renewable energy. For example, research shows that investments in clean energy can create more jobs per dollar than military spending. In improved community health. Resources can be redirected toward healthcare, education, and green infrastructure, reducing long-term social costs. Boeing's capabilities. Boeing has long been an industry leader in aerospace engineering, advanced manufacturing, and logistics. These capabilities have clear applications in green industries. Developing technologies for renewable energy, such as wind turbine design and solar panel infrastructure, engineering systems for high-speed rail and electric vehicle parts, leveraging their expertise in aerodynamics and material science, pivoting to space exploration projects, which can support scientific advancement and technological innovation without a defense-oriented focus. Pathways to transition. One pathway that Boeing can take is in the clean energy sector. Boeing's existing manufacturing and engineering skills could directly support large-scale clean energy projects, wind turbine and solar panel production, similar technical expertise in structural design materials and safety requirements applies here. Carbon capture and storage solutions. As the need to address climate change becomes urgent, companies like Boeing could be essential in researching and producing carbon capture technology. Pathway 2, green transportation infrastructure. Transportation is a huge contributor to emissions. With Boeing's experience in efficient design, they can contribute to high-speed rail, creating parts and systems for an efficient rail infrastructure aligned with sustainable development goals. Electric aviation. Boeing is already exploring electric-powered air travel, which could support sustainable domestic and international travel without the defense focus. Pathway 3, research and development for sustainable technologies, battery storage, and energy efficiency solutions. Boeing's commitment to R&D makes it an ideal candidate to lead in developing technologies for a sustainable economy. Another area, a potential area, is smart cities and
I'm not sure if it's me or if Katrina has frozen.
She looks frozen to me.
Okay. I'm not sure how many more slides she had to go through. So I'm not sure if we should just go to the next speaker.
Well, why don't we go to the next speaker and then let Katrina come back, if she gets unfrozen.
Okay. The next speaker is Tina Cordova. Tina is co-founder of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. She's been working for 19 years to bring attention to the negative health effects suffered by the people of Mexico after exposure to radiation by the Trinity bomb. Tina is going to cover the need for Congress to pass the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act to bring justice that is long overdue. The Tularosa Basin is where the government detonated the Trinity bomb, and it's a vast expanse between two mountain ranges in south central New Mexico. Welcome, Tina. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Rachel. I want to thank Dawn and the Green Party of Missouri for hosting this event, and I want to thank all of the other presenters. I've learned so much this evening, and it's in alignment with the work that I do every day. So thank you to everybody for participating. My goal tonight is to share some information about the Trinity bomb and how we were overexposed to radiation, what's happened in the last 79 years as a result of that, and then encourage everybody to join with us in fighting for the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. So very quickly, I want to talk to you about the test at Trinity. It was the first bomb detonated any place in the world, the first atomic bomb detonated any place in the world. And the people of New Mexico were the first people exposed to radiation any place in the world. Lots of people think that the government didn't know what they were doing, but they full well knew at the time of Trinity that radiation was dangerous to human health. That was a well-known fact established prior to Trinity. They also knew that the bomb was going to create massive fallout. They just clearly did not care that people lived as close as 12 miles to the bomb site. And so they didn't warn anybody before or afterwards. What they didn't know, though, is how much plutonium would be required to actually cause the fission process to take place. So they overpacked the bomb with plutonium, and the bomb created massive fallout. The cloud ascended somewhere between 40 and 60,000 feet past the atmosphere, penetrating the stratosphere. And as you all well know, when something like that goes up, it has to come down, and it did. It came down as a radioactive ash that fell on the communities surrounding Trinity for days and days and days afterwards. Our government has always described that area as remote and uninhabited, but we know because we've collected the data from the 1940 census that there were 13,000 children, women, and men living in a 50-mile radius to the Trinity test site. If you extend that radius to 150 miles, we're talking about 500,000 people. So the area was not remote and uninhabited. We were just people of color. New Mexico is the only state in the union that has always been a minority-majority state, and over 60% of the people living here in 1945 were Native Americans and Hispanos, people who have lived here for hundreds, if not thousands of years, because the Trinity site interfaces with White Sands National Monument, where they found the oldest footprints in the world. They date back 23,000 years. So I always tell everybody they invaded our lands and our lives, and then they left. The reason we were so horribly overexposed was not just because of the nature of the bomb, but because of our lifestyles. In 1945, we did not have running water. We depended on the rain that fell. July, when they detonated the bomb, was our rainy season. We would have been collecting that water and filling up our cisterns, our lakes, our rivers, our ditches. Our complete water supply was now affected. We also didn't have electricity, so we didn't have grocery stores. We had mercantile stores, and you could buy things like sugar, flour, coffee, cereal, rice, but you couldn't buy meat, you couldn't buy dairy, you could not buy produce. All of those things were developed, grown, accumulated through our own means at our own homes. We also hunted a great deal for small mammals, and now our complete food source was overexposed. There are 3 ways that you're overexposed to radiation: inhalation, that would have been taking place as the ash fell from the sky, through ingestion, which would have been taking place through our water and our food supply, and then the last one is absorption through your skin. That certainly would have been taking place also, because if you don't have running water, you don't bathe as often. So any of that ash that settled on your scalp or your skin likely stayed there for days until the time that you had a chance to bathe. So what has happened in the 79 years since then? Well, after a 10-year decline in infant mortality in New Mexico, that summer after Trinity, the summer of 1945, we had a horrendous spike in infant mortality. The first victims of an atomic bomb were American babies in New Mexico, and we've collected that data as well. We went from losing something like 30 babies per 1,000 to losing over 100 babies per 1,000 in New Mexico. And those numbers are highly understated because most children in New Mexico were born at home in 1945 because we didn't have medical facilities. They were delivered by doulas, and their births were not recorded, and so likely if they died within that first year of life, their deaths were not recorded. And we're finding that Catholic Church records show many more infants died that summer than are recorded in death certificates. In my own family, I'm the 4th generation to have cancer since 1945. My two great-grandfathers alive at the time in Tularosa, 45 miles from the bomb site, developed cancer within 10 years. It was called stomach cancer. We'll never fully know because we didn't have diagnostic processes back then. But they were given morphine. They were sent home to die. And in a very short period of time, they both died. Both my grandmothers had cancer. My father, who was a 4-year-old child living a very, full life, drinking tons of fresh cow's milk and dipping water out of a cistern in 1945, developed 2 oral cancers. My dad didn't smoke, rarely drank alcohol, never would have put chewing tobacco in his mouth, had no viruses, and he developed 2 distinctly different oral cancers. I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer at the age of 39. Again, the first thing they asked me was, when were you exposed to radiation? Now I have a 24-year-old niece diagnosed at the age of 23 with thyroid cancer as well. This is multi-generational. My family is not unique. We've recorded hundreds of families like mine in New Mexico because we've been gathering health surveys for 17 years now, and we have thousands of them. So this is a multi-generational problem. They not only set out the course of history, health history for those people who were alive at the time. There's a genetic component to this, and now our children are being diagnosed with cancers earlier and earlier. The terrible thing is New Mexico is a cradle to grave state where we also have uranium mining taking place, or did take place. We have over 1,000 abandoned uranium mine and mill sites across the Navajo Nation, Laguna and Acoma Pueblo. These are Superfund sites that have never been addressed by our government. They extracted 32 million tons of uranium from those mine sites and processed it at the mill sites. And basically, people have been dying ever since. The testing moved to the Pacific Islands, and many of you probably know this history, and then eventually made its way back to Nevada. They conducted over 100 above-ground tests in Nevada. They completely blanketed the American West, and they walked away. In 1990, they established a fund, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. It never went far enough. It only includes certain counties in Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. Never addressed the Trinity site downwinders. Only covers uranium workers who worked until 1971, not because it became safe after 1971, but because after 1971, our government was not the only consumer of uranium. So they said industry will take care of those people, and they haven't. And so for 14 years, we've had bills introduced in Congress. This is the first year that we've had a successful vote. Actually, 2023 was the first year we had a successful vote. Out of those years, the US Senate passed the bill by a vote of 64 and 39 against, and they added the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act expansion to the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. But the House struck it out. And then in March of 2024, through the efforts of Senator Josh Hawley in Missouri, he wants to add certain zip codes around St. Louis because they enriched uranium and dumped the waste locally. That is not an unusual thing. That was done in many places: Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, Washington. So he has fought very hard, and now we have a vote of 69 to 30, more than a supermajority, in favor of passing RECA, but Speaker Johnson has blocked the process in the House. And so where are we at now? We're requesting, we're demanding that Speaker Johnson bring this to the floor for a vote because we have the votes to pass it. He simply says it's going to cost too much. We have spent $10 trillion on our nuclear program since their inception, 10 trillion. RECA has paid out 2.5 billion in 34 years. We had to exaggerate that to make it show up on a pie chart in comparison to 10 trillion. RECA now, if expanded, would cost $50 billion. And so we're asking everybody to join with us. You can reach Speaker Johnson at 202-225-4000. I'll put it in the chat. Don't call him once, call him every day. He's receiving lots of calls from people all across the nation. He needs to know that this is an issue of social justice, environmental justice, and that people all across the country are interested and want this to happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tina. Next, we're going to have Don Fitz. Don's the organizer of this shindig. He's also the author of Healthcare in Cuba, which documents how Cuba spends 10% per person on medical care while having a longer life expectancy and lower infant mortality than the United States. How can we preserve, sorry, I, yeah, how can we preserve jobs while reducing military production and degrowing the overall economy? Welcome, Don.
Okay, great. Could Chris or Joe bring up the slides for me? Okay, after I thought about this webinar, I thought I would have crossed out the word preserving jobs and say we can increase jobs while we degrow the economy. And I'm gonna have 3 points that I want to make tonight. The first point may shock and disturb people, including other people on the panel, but I urge you to hold off and listen to the second and third points that I want to make. Okay, could you go to the second slide? When we talk about decreasing production of militarism, what we can that includes a lot of jobs besides just making the bombs. That includes all the McDonald's workers who even have a restaurant down the street. It could mean the entire town is having would be disappeared if you remove the military production, and that would not make our proposal a very popular one. And so my point is that shifting more production to different jobs is only a partial solution. If you could show the third slide, the next slide, please. So one way that people talk about where jobs could be moved is a smaller class for education, a smaller class size. And that's true, but if and only if the shift in jobs goes to more teachers and doesn't go to more administrators and bureaucrats like the education system loves to do. Another example that I could think of, especially from my book about Cuba, is that you don't, if you shift workers to medicine, that does not help. Could you go to the next slide? Okay, it doesn't help if you increase work for insurance workers in insurance companies like coding or developing Medicare Advantage plans. And like was said in the introduction, Cuba spends a lot less money on medical care, like 90% less per person, but has better outcomes than the United States. And so my point is from these few examples that shifting military workers to research would not help in much of anything if the research that they're doing is actually damaging. If they're doing the wrong things, such as increasing the research on genetically engineered organisms, or increasing research on new pesticides, or increasing research on nuclear power, that doesn't help anything. So the problem that I see is not that there's jobs with insufficient workers, but that workers are paid for doing the wrong things. And also people are often paid for doing nothing useful. If I could look at the next slide. You might have heard of the book by David Graeber from 2018 called Bullshit Jobs. And he suggests that most jobs in the United States are pointless and destructive, and that it causes profound psychological violence for people to have jobs that are not actually helping anything. So I want to go to the second point, which is that when we're talking about I think instead of talking about the military, we need to talk about the war economy, because what's done with the military, what's done in the war economy is far larger than just producing guns, bombs, and missiles, which is bad enough in itself. So here we have an example of nuclear power in Chernobyl. I mean, we don't really need more research in nuclear power. We need to figure out how to shut nuclear power down. If we could look at the next slide. The problem with a lot of the alternative energy, actually virtually all of the alternative energy, is that it involves land grabs. It involves throwing people off of their land in order to get the necessary minerals in order to make all the alternative energy. If we could look at the next slide, the war in nature includes deforestation, chemical poisons, So what I'm talking about is that it's not just the bombs that destroy people, it's the entire war economy that is shown in many different ways. I couldn't find a good slide to illustrate this, but international trade deals are financial warfare. I mean, international trade deals are a way to get poor countries to pay into rich countries by financial deals. And as Wes Jackson of the Land Institute once said when he was at a program in St. Louis, it's not just fossil fuels that are the problem, it is energy itself. And alternative energy is just part of the war on nature. If we could look at the next slide, slide 9. And another type of war that we most of us experience every day if we go to work is the war on workers. Because ever since the Industrial Revolution, there's been an expanded division between middle and manual labors, which is bad for both sides. Basically, when capitalism was introduced, it really expanded the difference between those who are deemed to be inferior, who must do manual labor, and those who are deemed to be superior, who tend to have various managerial sorts of jobs. And so what I'm talking about in the war economy is all of the forms of domination is part of the war economy. And we all experience that in virtually all of our relationships, whether we dominate somebody else at work because we're a supervisor or because we're both dominated by those above us and dominate the people who we might supervise. Okay. So what the third point that I want to make is reducing the war economy involves a total economic transformation. It's very unfortunate that people who talk about and write about degrowth or militarism very rarely mention a shorter work week. And to me, a shorter work week is the key to decreasing to reducing war production. If I could look at the next slide. Okay, this kid agrees with me. We need to change jobs dramatically, and we all need to work a lot less, because if we're just shifting to one job to another but maintaining a 40-hour work week, we'll just transform the exploitative nature of work. We'll transform what sort of destructive effects there are, but we won't reduce the destruction itself. So one of the ways to do this is to reduce the division between manual and physical labor. It's basically unhealthy two things are unhealthy. It's unhealthy to stand on your feet all day long doing physical labor. It's unhealthy to sit at a desk all day long doing intellectual labor. We need to absorb workers from the war economy to doing multiple types of work. We need to completely redesign jobs. And so the issue becomes, if we could look at the next slide, the issue becomes who will make the decisions about redesigning jobs. And I like to say that I never have faith that the working class will do everything right, but I do have total faith that the ruling class will do everything wrong. They make decisions about communities, workers, and natures that are absolutely destructive, because profit is always the most important factor. So what I believe needs to be done is to transform the war on workers as one of the parts of the war economy, so that workers themselves make the fundamental decisions about redesigning work, about redesigning not just how we work, but what we actually produce, whether through unions or other workplace organizations. If I could look at the next slide, what we basically need to do is a lot of people who are for degrowth say that we need to decrease consumption, we need to decrease production and consumption, but they're actually two completely different phenomena. We can expand consumption while we reduce production. And there's thousands, millions of examples. I just thought of something very simple, which I call the blue jean paradox. Which you'd rather have, 2 pair of jeans that last 10 years each, or 3 pair of jeans that last 5 years, 5 years each? You know, from an employer's point of view, you want to get people to buy as much stuff as possible. So if you make 3 pair of jeans that last half as long, you're better off because you have 3 things. You know, if you have 2 pair of jeans, they last for 20 years, then the consumption, the use goes up while the production goes down. And that's something that I think that a degrowth economy should we should do this throughout the economic structure of society. Working people should decide how we can produce products that are better and better. And so the big issue is how can we degrow the war economy while having more jobs. 1 minute left. Okay. A shorter work week, fewer wars, and less environmental destructions. If I could look at the last slide. Okay. So what I've talked about is things that are sort of formula, things that are general principles. But I think what we need to remember is that the most important thing we need to do is to change people's hearts and minds about what sort of society we want, how we want to work, what we want to produce, and how we can do it less destructively. And so the goal that I perceive that we need to have is to reduce domination in as many areas of life as we can. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Don. So we're going to switch to audience participation, and we have sponsoring organizations, representatives who are going to be making maximum of 3-minute comments. And the first one is the Iowa Green Party, represented by Holly Hart. Holly, are you here?
Holly was here earlier, but she had to go to another meeting.
Okay. In that case, next we would have Veterans for Peace, Santa Fe, Ken Mayers. Is Ken here? I am not hearing anything. So I'll assume Ken will not be speaking either. And we'll move on. Green Party Banking and Monetary Reform Committee, Kevin McCormick. Is Kevin here?
I am here.
Okay, you have 3 minutes.
You heard me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I want to thank all the speakers, and I want to thank the Don and the Gateway Green Party for Gateway Greens for doing this, because I thought this was so far been a very informative and interesting program. Okay, well, I'm with the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee of the Green Party, and the Green Party platform. Under Part 4, Economic Justice and Sustainability, you have item letter N, monetary reform or greening the dollar. And that is our deal at the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee, that we promote this particular plank of the Green Party platform. And so the three basic parts of monetary reform are nationalize the Federal Reserve System, end the bank creation of money, and the federal government creates the money and spends it into the economy in various ways. So on the Green Party US website, there is in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little dark bar, and it has committees, and you can find the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee under that link. And for those of you that did articles and are creating material, short articles, if you would like to submit that to the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee, we do put out a newsletter, and so we would love to hear from you on that basis. Okay, now I just want to make a couple of points here, because I know this sounds like maybe this has nothing to do with the topic, but I think it has a lot to do with it. And I'm going to quote from
You have 1 minute.
Okay, Alexander Hamilton. The Bank of England unites public authority and faith with private credit, and hence we see what a vast fabric of paper credit is raised on a visionary basis. Had it not been for this, England would never have found sufficient funds to carry on her wars. But with the help of this, she has done and is doing wonders. So it was the Bank of England, which is the model for the Federal Reserve System that we have, that enabled Imperial England to maintain wars all around the world. Okay, now, Martin Giles and Benjamin Page, researchers at Princeton. The central point that emerges from our research is that economic elites and organized groups represent business interests, have substantial independent impacts on the U.S. government policy, while mass-based interest groups and average citizens have little or no independent influence. So the Federal Reserve is a privately owned banking cartel that
Need
controls
to
the
wrap
money
up.
system. Okay. So I want to say here that no one mentioned incentives. What are the incentives for the banking cartel to fund the military industrial complex versus funding these job transitions? And I'm going to say in the present system, the incentives all go to the military industrial complex. That's where the profits can be sucked out of the system instead of being given to the public, given to the financiers who own the banking cartel. So Charlie Munger said, show me the incentives and I'll show you the results. So I would hope that people would put banking and monetary reform in their list of talking points because, I think the present system has produced the results that it wants, and we need to change the system to get the results that we want. And thank you very much. And I did really enjoy the program from everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, next we have the Oregon Veterans for Peace, represented by Dan. I'm not sure how to say the last name. Might be Shia, might be Shay.
By Shay. Thank you. Yeah, I'm really glad that I was invited to at least comment. I am, in Portland, Oregon, and of course we're off the Columbia River, which is downwinder from Hanford, and I've been involved with, the organizing with physicians for excuse me, with Physicians for Social Responsibility and other groups here on August 6th every year, August 6th or 9th, depending on which day we have available, to raise the issue of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But one of the things, since you're talking about, Don asked me to how I felt about this degrowing the military. And so I had written back to him, and I'm just going to read what I wrote. I says, I do believe when we demand changing a green, sustainable economy and a better working conditions where former industries must be scrapped, meaning many who worked in those areas will lose their jobs. That is why many fight against their own interests and better interests. For fear of losing their livelihoods, and why we must compensate financially and with a transitional training and green jobs. This holds true for those in the military. If we are to degrow the military while preserving jobs, we need a transitional compensation to peaceful jobs where they are trained for climate disaster rescue units, firefighting, for cleaning the oceans from plastics, garbage, toxic runoffs, and oil spills, policing environmental polluters, what might be a good idea, learning environmental sciences and laws to become regulators, prosecutors of environmental crimes against humanity. There are many careers in peaceful pursuits that we need in the sciences, we need in education, in all fields, engineering, architecture, marine biology, archaeology, geology, doctors, nurses, etc. There are unlimited and affordable when we take the money and profit from WMDs, from the emergence of death, from the
1 minute.
military industrial complex. Yeah. And I just came off a webinar with Agent Orange, and I'm an Agent Orange victim. So I know the effects it had on not only human life, but on the environment. And Veterans for Peace, and the national, if you go to our website, we have a complete program called Environmental Costs of War. And, for centuries, war has been not only involved in the annihilation of human life, but the environmental destruction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Next, representing the Illinois Green Party, Chibu Asonye. It doesn't look like Chibu's here. In that case, we have another Veterans for Peace representative, but this one is Chapter 61 St. Louis, Chloe Richards.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I do want to say thank you for having us here for this discussion. It was tremendous. I really enjoyed all the presentations. And Christian, I'm a huge fan. Sorry, I'm not going to try to glaze too hard or nothing, but I've seen a lot of your stuff online, and I really appreciate the work you're doing. Um, I guess the only thing I definitely want to add is that degrowing the military for veterans, especially those of us who've seen what the horrors of war. It's degrowing it is a very personal fight. Um, I really feel like right now, especially, is a really great time for outreach to not only prevent people from joining the ranks of the military, so we can take away their manpower and kind of force them to reanalyze. But it's lots of spaces these days. I see it with Boeing. I was actually attending UMSL for a year and a half, and I just saw just how much they have recruiters and their presence out there, and they're trying to get out into the youth, and either they're going to have them on one end dropping the bombs, or they're going to have them on the other end making the bombs. So everyone keep up the good fight, and I'm glad we can be here and help out.
Thank you, Chloe. And from the South Carolina Green Party, Bill Kreml, or is it William?
Either one.
Okay. Welcome.
I've been called worse. But anyway, let me be very brief. I'd like to expand the circle of what we're talking about to say that one way that we can cut our military expenditures is by taking a very hard look at the alliances that we've gotten ourselves into. Some of them may be worthy, but some of them aren't. And I'm going to be very specific and very brief here. I remember my brother, I'm 83 years old, and I remember my brother in 1948 was very troubled with the Arab-Israeli war. I went to my mother, what's going on? Well, what's going on is that your father was overseas for 3.5 years fighting the Nazis, and he stayed in the reserves. And guess what? 1948, my brother thought that my father might be recalled. Actually, the chances of that were almost zero, but still, it was there. We have gotten locked in to the Middle East, and we could talk about some other countries too, but I'm just talking about Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all these other countries that we have gotten into an engagement with where we supply them with weaponry and ammunition and all the supporting um, logistical stuff. That's something we should be speaking to as well, because it's bad enough that we have entirely too much from Boeing and Northrop and RTX and all of those, and I appreciate all of the commentary, but we also have got to say, look, Does Israel really own us? Boy, these last months have
1
made it
minute.
look very bad. Thank you. I'll be through in a minute. You've all seen what's happened with Gaza. Now you see the annexations, okay? You've got um, other areas in Judea and Samaria. And a lot of the right-wing Israeli politicians, including Netanyahu, of course, are concerned about having the expansion of Israel's borders. And we are supplying them with all kinds of military wherewithal. I could go on, but I'm not going to do it. I just say it's deep in our system. Our members of Congress, I'm a political scientist, roughly 90% of the members of Congress go to the APEC convention every year, okay? I attended a conference at my university in which
Wrap up.
Friedman from the New York Times came, and it was just sickening. It was sickening because he is part of it. And that's where we are with our members of Congress, members of the press, some members of the academy. Thank you all very much. Thanks for inviting me. I've retired from the steering committee. I'm 83 years old, as I say, but nobody wanted to do this. And I said, hey, it's a good group of people. Don's a good guy. And I went back, and it took me a minute to find what Don had sent me. But I'm glad to be here with you all. You're all good people. Thank you.
Thanks, William. There's a representative from the Maine Green Party, Jacques Davenot, couldn't be here, but has a statement for me to read. So I'm going to do that now. Researchers at the University of Massachusetts Amherst established in 2 linked studies that military contracting is a terrible jobs program, just in terms of the number of jobs created. A similar investment in any of the other sectors of the economy studied, construction, healthcare, education, or even just cash rebates to taxpayers, generated many more jobs than an investment in the war industry. Maine's Congresswoman Shelley Pigree came into office 10 years ago, assuring me that she knew all about the Poland and Peltier research and had presented it many times when she worked for Common Cause. Why then do Pingree and a lemming-like herd in Congress continue to spend big on contracts for General Dynamics and the like? Senator Bernie Sanders fought successfully to get a warplane factory in Vermont. Don't they want more full-time, full benefit jobs in their state? Do campaign contributions rather than actual jobs make more of a difference to them? And that was Jacques Davenot from Maine's Green Party's comment. We have a few possible people who could possibly be here to comment. The Green Party of Washington, Lisa Kanar. Is Lisa here to comment? Okay, assuming not. The Pacific Green Party of Oregon, Justin Phillip. Justin, are you here? Okay, and a potential representative from Black Alliance for Peace. And I'm not sure I can pronounce this name well, but I can try. Asantewa Nkrumah Ture. Okay, so that person probably isn't here either. In that case, the field will be open. So raise your hand if you have a question for one of the presenters, and I will try to call on you in order. I'm going to ask that your question be very brief. Try to be concise in your question so that we can hear more from the presenters. I think when people raise their hand, it should show up at the front of the list here. Ah, Matt Stiles. Are you muted?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Oh, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm with the Green Party of Utah here. And I guess my quick question is I love all the presentations that we've heard and it's very clear how possible and practical it is to degrow the military. I think the biggest hurdle that I've sort of encountered talking to people in Utah, which is a very conservative state, is convincing people not that it's possible, but that it's wise. And I think there's a fear factor at play here where we need to have the strongest military possible in order to protect ourselves from threats abroad. I wonder, from the panel, what are some strategies or some ideas or any sort of effort uh, for how to get the message across? And I think Don, I like what Don said about focusing on changing people's hearts and minds. How do we get people to sort of let go of that fear and realize maybe that having the biggest military, having such an extremely large military is counterproductive to our safety or otherwise? How do we sort of address that fear and convince people that it's a good idea that we don't need such a strong military?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Any takers?
Sure. I would, this is Don. Don't forget that either Chris Mann or Jerome Bauer needs to say something about the next webinar that we're going to have in December. But responding to the question about how we win people over to the idea, I think one of the things which is almost totally overlooked in degrowth literature is having a shorter work week. I mean, usually when people write about degrowth, they might write like one sentence or even one phrase of one sentence about a shorter work week, but not really go into it. I mean, that's the way that we degrow the military. I don't think that we can seriously degrow the military by just moving people into other jobs. That first of all, that's not it doesn't it's not physically practical for a lot of things. It would be for some, but not for others. Just to move people into other jobs, and it's even if you do, the jobs that they go into are very likely to be just as destructive as the jobs that they came out of. I mean, if you stop working on fossil fuels and you start to work on solar panels, well, then you have to get the material for solar panels. You have to have land grabs all over the world, and when people resist you, you have to shoot them down, which means have to go back to having increasing the military in order to have your land grabs. So that doesn't help anything. But a shorter work week is something that I think that the overwhelming majority of people can relate to.
I can also respond to that. I really appreciate the shorter work week because I was a former union organizer and representative, and I actually put forward that many times because you employ more people, you allow people greater opportunities to actualize their own personal growth and education, et cetera, and be with their families and a very healing process. But one of the things I just came back in May, I was on a international peace delegation to the Philippines, organized by Buy-in USA. And when we're talking about solar, and one of the things is our government has military bases there that sort of force trade deals with the Philippines, with some of that being issues of nuclear power. Others is that when you're talking about lithium mining and this whole idea of solar, is they're going through land grabs, and the people are resisting it in a number of ways. There is a civil war going on there, and people are being killed and massacred over the right to grab land and develop these commercial enterprises there. So, yes, we need a shorter workday, but we also there is a movement across the world in which people are rising up and standing up against these military bases around the world, which is really imperialism and occupation. So we need to build that solidarity, not just here in this country, but around the world. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. So I missed something in my notes. I'm supposed to call on either Jerome Bauer or Chris Mann to speak to announce the December 4th webinar. And I'd like to do that now. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yes, the December 4th Wednesday webinar will be from 7 to 9 p.m. And the reason for the time change is because we will be meeting face-to-face at our own stamping ground, the Legacy Books and Cafe in St. Louis, after our long COVID exile. We will be meeting face-to-face and starting with a sing-along, the way we always used to. This will be the number 4 in the series called Green Transportation Reimagined. Our topic last year was Ending Automobile Dependence. This year's title is 2 rhetorical questions. Why do we need public transit? Why doesn't everybody just drive a car? After last week's election, maybe the question should be, why doesn't everybody just drive a Tesla? Just kidding. Anyway, the first part of the event will be, we'll have a speaker from the Metrolink Green Line expansion, the head of the project, and then responses from community critics in African-American neighborhood. And then responses from members of the Gateway Green Alliance and other groups, and also presentations by local disability activists. So that'll be the first 40 minutes of the event. And then after that will be a webinar, with speakers from outside of St. Louis. Kansas City, why should buses be free? Why, transportation should be free? And why are they closing down bus stations in Chicago? So anyway, we're really hoping that if you live in St. Louis, you will come to Legacy Books and Cafe 7 to 9 p.m. Near the corner of Union and Delmar. And we hope you'll eat dinner at our favorite local Black-owned business and help support it. And if you live outside of St. Louis, we hope you'll tune in via Zoom, because this is also a Zoom webinar. This is our first hybrid format. And we're also hoping that wherever you live, you will organize events like this on issues and present them as hybrid webinars, so that those of us who are interested, who don't live where you live, can tune in as well. So we have the best of both worlds. And from now on, in the next year, we will be alternating month by month. Every other month will be a local hybrid webinar dealing with local issues, but inviting everybody all over the world. And every other month will be webinars like this one, interstate Green Party webinars. So anyway, yeah, we hope you can join us either in person or on Zoom. And I hope you could hear me. Could you hear me? I'm trying to talk as much as I can.
Yes, we can hear you. Okay.
Oh,
Thank you, Jerome.
so anyway, yeah, it'll be really great. We have a really great lineup of speakers and some really great venues.
Wrap up.
Hope you can make it.
Okay. Now somebody had their hand up. A couple people had their hands up, and they don't anymore. Did you give up or?
Well, this is Kevin McCormick here. I was just going to respond to, I think, well, actually, Haig had his hand up before I did, so I see
Yeah,
him
that's
now on
right.
my
I
screen.
had his hand up first. Go ahead, hi.
Just wanted to speak to Matt's question, which is an important one. And I think there are two replies to the question of doesn't this make us strong and safe? There was a short time after the collapse of the Soviet Union where the US had absolutely unchallenged dominance as the global superpower. And instead of resting on our laurels, we proceeded to tear apart the Mideast with a bunch of ill-conceived wars of mixed motivation, but now in retrospect considered a string of disasters. So that's a practical demonstration of how becoming a muscle-bound military had the opposite result. It didn't make us safe. It made us dangerous to the world and inflicted harm on ourselves. The other argument is the diminution of our military establishment would normally proceed in parallel with diplomacy that would secure similar reductions in other nations that we currently view as adversaries or threats. And many countries are open to this kind of cooperative work, and there's a history of arms control agreements and other types of agreements to draw down military force. So those are the two arguments I would recommend for countering that concern. Over.
Thanks, Hag. Okay. Kevin, did you want to say something still?
Well, yeah, I wanted to say that, the perception that we need the military for defense is very much promoted in the media and all the politicians. If we don't fight them there, they're going to invade us, kind of thing. We'll have to fight them here. But if you can change the perception, change the mindset to recognize that it's like one of those illusion things where is it a vase with flowers or is it a woman's face or whatever? I can't remember the exact thing, but it's one of those things. What do you see in this picture? So if you can change it to see instead of, us having this tremendous need for defense, if you can see what it actually is a projection of the empire. It's not us that needs the defense. It's the rest of the world that needs to defend itself against the American empire, the military industrial complex. And that's what creates the hostility. So we're like pushing somebody, bullying somebody in the schoolyard and then blaming them for protesting about it. Over.
Well, I don't see any more hands up, and we're an hour and a half in to the program. So I think I should consult with Dawn and find out, do you think that we should wrap up?
Well, if anybody else has anything to say, we ought to go ahead. But if no one else has anything to say, I would just say I hope people tune in on December the 2nd. Was that the right December the 2nd or December the 4th?
I think it's the 4th.
Go ahead. So that's my suggestion.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for coming and listening to the speakers, and thank you to the speakers for taking time out to share your expertise with all of us. It's such a big topic, and I think, if there's one takeaway, maybe it's just do what you can, right? We're each individuals, and if we each do what we can, then collectively we can make a big difference. So there was a call out to contact Speaker Johnson. I don't know if everyone got the phone number. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to say it accurately, but I think it was placed into the chat at some point. I'm trying to find it quickly. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, though. 202-225-4000. 202-225-4000. I don't remember what the statement was supposed to be, though. I think it was Tina who was talking about that. Anyway. Yeah, so
thank you, Rachel, for chairing the meeting.
Rachel, yeah, I deeply appreciate your facilitation.
You're
A
welcome.
lot of last minute shifts that we had to do. And
I
so
actually
it's a real challenge.
I really enjoy doing this kind of thing. So I'm honored to have been asked to do it. And also I've been looking forward to it. So
Great.
Thanks for see you next time.
Okay.
Thank you. Good, great.